we'll, we're gonna try. To me, this is a great chance to be able to talk about the need for conservation out there after we just had a flood. That stuff worked well where it was at. Generally, it was very important in some pieces out there. In fact, we saw some pieces that we visited down in Union County, up in Charles City area as well, where they have kind of looked at managing these watersheds and terraces and water retention basins, looked at managing those within a watershed. And what they did actually in Creston area was work with the county and the county engineer, and when they did work upland, they actually were able to replace some bridges with culverts because they had decreased the amount of water that would move in a flash flood, and they greatly lessened the amount of money that it would cost compared to bridges. And they put in culverts. And another project up in Charles City where they had an area of town that was flooding, and this was a project done 25 years ago. They over-designed terraces to hold 3 inches instead of 2 inches of rain, stopped that flash flood, and they lessened the amount of flooding that was going on in Charles City. And so we're interested in trying to see if we can look at some of these watersheds, target them out there, figure out if there's places that we can either help with some of the bridge work that needs to be done out there, the repair that needs to be done with county engineers, or local flooding, especially where you've got areas where you can have some flash flooding, some combination of topping up what's out there, maybe adding some water retention basins, other kinds of things, designed to empty out, and not do crop damage, but also to hold that first flash flood kind of event back, and try and partner a little bit more with some of the other folks out there to see if we can lessen the off-farm impact and tie this into not only erosion control and water quality, but also lessen the amount of water that's leaving, the hydrology of when this water goes and how fast it goes. And so there'll be some discussion. That complicates things a lot when you do that, because it's pretty easy with water quality. You know, this stuff was all started with erosion. When we're having terrible erosion, and we added water quality to it. Those things go pretty much hand in hand. But now you're talking about when that water's moving, and that water does need to move off because we got crops out there. But can we slow it down in a way that would prevent that first flash flood aspect, get it off still, but have it come off over 36 hours or 24 hours or 72 hours, enough that it still gets off, but it doesn't create that big flash event that causes stream bank erosion and causes flooding in areas, and there's a lot of erosion that happens when you move that first flush as well, besides the fact of off-farm impact into some of these other areas. So it's going to take some time to get that all into a form that makes a lot of sense. We're actually interested as well in potentially looking at a research project similar to Gilmore City, where Gilmore City is looking at tile underneath different farming practices over there and see what would come out of those tile, the impact on nitrogen, the impact on pesticides that would come out from applications. This would look at when would water move off a tile intake terrace versus grass waterways on that hill instead. When would it move? How much would move? What's the impact of water quality by putting the water under the ground instead of having it come across the top of the ground in that first flush? And so we need to figure out some of these things. We think sometimes we know a heck of a lot, but it's important to be able to figure out what's actually happening out there on that farm. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion around flooding. We need to know some of those things. Obviously, ag as well has been, it's all farmers' fault that we had this, right? There are folks that are saying that if we didn't have tile or we didn't have farm ground out there, well, maybe if we didn't have any farm ground out there, a lot of other things would be different too. But as we say, there were floodplains here before we ever got here, and there was impact when you consider the amount of rain that we got last year. We had fourth wettest year we ever had a year ago. We had one of the coolest and wettest winters that we had. We had flooding in eastern Iowa even back in April. And then the first 6 months of this year, statewide average, we had more rain that we've had in the last 136 years worth of weather records. So just a ton of water. We're trying to get it to hold more than what is possible. So we'll look at those pieces and what we can do and what we can learn and how we can do some things better. We're also looking at the urban areas as well. Look at infiltration in urban areas. We've got large parking lots and stores and streets and developments and areas that weren't there 15 years ago, and that water now rushes right off those areas. And we got to look at ways to create some infiltration into some of those areas, whether it's rain gardens, whether it's permeable paving, other kinds of things. I think it's a great way to engage everybody in the discussion of what do you do with your 3 feet. Everybody gets, every acre, every roof, every yard in this state gets about 3 feet of water a year. What do you do with it? Where does it all go? And it comes across every parking lot, and it comes across every farm. We got to figure out ways to make sure that we're doing the best thing that we can with that. And I think we've been working on it a long time on the farm. We don't have it all right yet, but we've surely been looking at it a long time. Some of the other areas, we just build a tunnel under the ground and move it as fast as we can. It's got to get off our urban areas, but we got to do what we can to be able to make sure that the water quality isn't impacted by those areas as well. And then just the other pieces of the department. I mean, about 200 people in the Division of Soil Conservation in the Department of Ag. We have 200 people in regulatory, so we have feed and fertilizer inspectors, pesticide inspectors, weight and measures folks, gas pumps, scales, big scales, small scales. We have dairy inspectors. We have farmers market promotion effort. We have 170 farmers markets in the state. About $30 million goes across those farmers markets every year. That continues to grow. We have a state veterinarian. We just instituted some new rules on cattle coming in from the west. We have some cattle issues with Minnesota and some tuberculosis out up in northwest Minnesota. Ways to make sure we find avian influenza if it comes here, those kinds of things around animal diseases. We have a state climatologist, Harry Hilliker, and a busy guy keeping track of all the weather things that have happened over the last couple years here. He's the one that comes up with the numbers comparing us to 136 years worth of weather records. We have the state entomologist, works on bugs, plants, diseases, those kinds of things, works with the others out there on that, trying to make sure that we don't get emerald ash borer, and that we have our sentinel plots when we work with the soybean folks in Iowa State around soybean rust, those kinds of things. And then the business, the greenhouse business as well. Plants moving across state lines, they've got to have health certificates as they're moving around, so we don't get some new plant disease from Michigan or someplace else. And so those all are certificates of, and we don't give them something too. Our plants that go across state lines have to have certificates around some of those plant diseases and insects. So lots of pieces, but questions, comments?